Hey friends, thanks for tuning in. I have Dave Kranzler from Investment Research Dynamics back on the line to talk about all things economics and PizzaGate and New World Order. Dave, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me back on. I love doing this show. I love the truth seeking and just hard hitting, putting out the truth.
Well, you know what, man? I do too. It's what makes us tick, right? I mean, we are the antithesis to the mainstream mockingbird horror media, and you and I are doing our best to get the truth out. And I want to take a walk down memory lane here real quick. I want to play this soundbite from George H.W. Bush when he was president. I'm going to age myself by telling people that I remember this specific speech when I was a kid, and I was lucid enough as a kid to say, what? What is the New World Order? That sounds weird. Listen to this, Dave.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. What I realize now as an adult, Dave, is that that speech was not meant for the American people. That speech was meant for the elites who speak in code, the elites that he reported to, the banksters that put him in power. And now as an adult, I know what that new world order is and what it will bring us if we allow it to happen. And here's what it'll bring us, Dave. A cashless society and pedophilia, as the Department of Justice wants to normalize or legalize 12 perversions. PizzaGate tells us all we need to know about this new world order.
That's kind of frightening, especially, I mean, to me, when you were replaying that soundbite, it brought to mind that famous speech that David Rockefeller gave, I think, to the Council of Foreign Relations, where he was referencing New World Order and all that stuff. And then I guess there's a quote from it's either his autobiography or memoirs or something where he talks about, their goal is to try and create a new world order. And so, and actually, to tell you the truth, I'm not necessarily sure that Bush is a henchman or a capo. I think he's one of the guys that are trying to pull the strings.
Oh, one of the players at the top. You might be right. I mean, he was the head of the CIA, and going back to his father, Prescott Bush, who was knee-deep in bed with the industrialists and the banksters, and they wanted to do a fascist coup of the U.S. government back in the 30s. Smedley Butler blew the whistle. You're right. You're absolutely right. The Bush crime family sits at the top, but above them are the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the Morgans, I would think.
Yeah, and who I think is also up there quietly and in a sneaky way is Bill Gates, because we don't really hear a lot about him. I just have read a lot of references to him doing some wacky biological experiments or medical experiments in Africa.
Well, yeah. Now, the Gates Foundation is knee-deep in eugenics, and of course we always hear about how they want to spread their needles of joy all over the planet to vaccinate the third world. And I think one noteworthy thing to say about Bill Gates, which is one generational wealth versus multi-generational banking wealth, is that his father played a huge role in Planned Parenthood. I'll put the documentation on the screen here, but you want to talk about eugenics, you have to consider Planned Parenthood, and how ironic is it that Gates' father played a significant role at Planned Parenthood in the early days.
That's interesting. I didn't know that about him in terms of his lineage. To me, he's kind of scary or sinister because he has, he's one of the richest guys in the world, and you never really hear that much about him. It's the guys that you don't hear about who are the guys that frighten me the most. I mean, obviously, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Soros, Brzezinski, Kissinger, those names get bandied about the alternative media all the time. But there's another guy also who's really frightening, who lives here in Denver, Phil Anschutz. And you never hear about Anschutz, but he's quietly probably one of the richest guys in the world, definitely one of the richest guys in the United States. And you don't even really, I think Forbes recently, the last several years, kind of picked up on his wealth, but I'm friends with someone who used to be played squash with his son-in-law, and he had a little bit of insight into what goes on there. And I mean, Anschutz he owns property and businesses all over the world, And when I spent time living in D.C. for about 6 months in 2004, and I was reading an article in the Washington Post back then, way before Bezos owned it, so it was still a semi-legitimate publication. Um, and saw this article that was talking about how Anschutz was buying up community newspapers all over the country. It had announced that he was buying a community newspaper in the Anacostia neighborhood, which is probably one of the worst ghetto areas in the country. And it also happened to be where they built the Washington Nationals baseball stadium. And I'm sure he had bought up a bunch of land around that area and was instrumental in the decision to putting up the stadium there. He was also, I'm sure he was instrumental to putting up the Denver International Airport where it was put up, and I'm sure he owned a lot of the land around there, because I know he owns a lot of the land that's sort of adjacent to sort of the immediate area where the Denver International Airport is. So it's guys like that you don't really hear about. Those are the guys that frighten me the most, because you never know what they're up to.
Yeah, that's a great point. I agree with you about that. And it calls to mind Ted Turner, too, who at one point was the largest landowner, I believe, in the United States, and, of course, the founder of CNN, the ultimate mockingbird horror media is CNN. And I think Turner was once quoted as saying that he'd love to return in another life as a plague, something to that effect. I know Prince Philip said something similar. But these people at their core are all eugenicists, which gets me back to Bill Gates' father. Let me play you this video clip.
One issue that really grabbed me as urgent were issues related to population, reproductive health.
But did you come to reproductive issues as an intellectual?
When I was growing up, my parents were always involved in various volunteer things. My dad was head of Planned Parenthood.
So that's Bill Gates talking about his papa, who influenced him greatly as it pertains to population control, which is really what he's talking about there. He's interested in population control because, of course, the elite narrative, Dave, is that there's just too damn many of us useless eaters, man. There's too many of us useless eaters. And the billionaires, they don't have much time for us, and there's certainly not enough room or resources on this planet for all of us. So I guess according to the Georgia Guidestones, they just need to get rid of about 85% of us.
You know, I was actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was actually I was thinking about Ted Turner yesterday, because I couldn't remember if he still owned CNN, but he sold Turner Broadcasting to Time Warner. And I know he has a huge compound in Montana, and that, I probably spends time there and at his compounds all over the world. But you're right, I remember he was always really, really eccentric.
You know what I've come to realize, and I think many of us are now, we've talked about this for years, but with the PizzaGate emails and the Podesta files and what appears to be an entrenched pedophile ring at the heart of our government in D.C. That includes people at the very top of the pyramid of power, people like the Podesta brothers, people like the Clintons, and certainly on the right as well. This is not just a Democratic thing, this pedophile PizzaGate thing. I know there's Republicans entrenched in it too, but what I am beginning to realize, and we've talked about a lot, Dave, is that at the heart of all of this stuff is a real Satanist component. And how else do you explain people that would have interest in victimizing children, and by some accounts, in some evidence, in some of this coded language that suggests that they may even sacrifice children in these underground dungeons all over the world. I just did a gripping interview with Oli Demigard, a researcher, and he says that PizzaGate, although when I told him about it, because he was traveling, he's not from this country, he traveled to Texas for the JFK anniversary, and he spoke there, and he was jet-lagged, he'd just gotten back when we had our conversation. He didn't know about PizzaGate, but it didn't surprise him, because he's been following this satanic global pedo ring for decades. And every single time these pedos are exposed, their crimes are covered up, and none of the pedos go to jail. And typically what happens is the people that blow the whistle on these pedos, they're the ones that are harassed, they're the ones that go to court, they're the ones that get their kids taken away, they're the ones that sometimes do jail time. The system appears to be built to protect these people, and at the heart of it is this Satanist component. I just saw a picture today, I think it was on Brittany Pettibone's Twitter account, of Anton LaVey with John Kerry. Anton LaVey, the founder of Modern Day Church of Satanism. I just think at the heart of all of this insane abomination is a Satanist component. And these people embrace it, Dave.
You know, the pedophile thing, you know, Bill Clinton obviously has been nailed and flagged for being on that you know, billionaires
Jeffrey
Learjet.
Epstein. Yeah,
Yeah.
Lolita Express.
Right.
Pedo Island.
For some reason, what seemed to be left out of most of the media accounts of it was the fact that they were going there to get serviced by teenage girls, like underage teenage girls. 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds.
Well, that's right. And the media, the mainstream Mockingbird horror media, which now has less than a 10% approval rate in this country from the citizens of this country, ignores it. They skirt around it. They won't talk about it. And again, it seems to be a system that is built to cover up the crimes of these elite. And what do the elite want? They want a new world order. What will that give us? A cashless society, endless pedophilia, beastiality.
Well, we've already found a secret memo coming out of the Justice Department. They're now going to go after 12 new perversions, things like bestiality, polygamy, having sex with little boys and making that legal.
That's what they want. That's the New World Order. That, to me, sounds like a Satanist, a satanic empire.
You know, yeah, again, I haven't spent a lot of time researching that angle of it, but I know it's there, and I know that, you know, the symbolism is there, and it's everywhere you want to look. But in terms of the population control aspect, it's funny that you bring that up, because I was just thinking, I was reading an article yesterday or maybe 2 days ago about the advancement in robotics and how auto industry workers are soon going to be replaced by robotics. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, what do they plan on doing with all these displaced workers? Because if these guys, it seems like essentially what these guys want, the New World Order guys, is themselves existing and then robots doing everything else.
Yeah.
But then what happens? Because at some point they're going to eat each other. You know, if you play the tape out, I don't think they'll ever be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish. But, I mean, human nature dictates that, okay, so you have this circle of New World Order guys, and somehow they manage to bring in, first of all, I don't think they'll ever be able to bring in the Eastern Hemisphere people, you know, and leaders. I don't think China ever wants to share power with the U.S. I don't think Russia would want to share power with the U.S. I think the Putin, Xi Jinping coalition, I think that's sort of out of necessity more than anything, but it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time, especially as they extract more power from the West. I just think, you know, what these guys are envisioning, I think that natural human instinct and DNA is going to ultimately prevent it. Now, I don't know that it's going to prevent a lot of the atrocities that they probably have planned for the bulk of humanity, but it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, you know what? What worries me about what's going on in China is that to some extent it is the New World Order model. I mean, the majority of the population in China, certainly there's been a great deal of wealth built for many people in China, but for the majority, the vast majority of the 1.1 billion people, they live on what? Maybe $1 an hour, maybe a few dollars a day. I think it was the folks run into the cities to work at the Apple plant that were hoping to get the $1 an hour jobs to build iPhones. I mean, and that was considered a good job. Such a good job that many of those people then would swan dive off the top of the building during their lunch hour and kill themselves because it was such misery to work there. So to some extent, China already is the New World Order model. You know, more for the elite, less for the people. More for the few, less for the many. And I think that's what's so damn scary about where we're headed, and you're absolutely right about technology. Technology should free humanity, right? It should give us everything we need. I've said before, and you know it's true, this planet could be an Eden if the elite, if the rulers were benevolent instead of malevolent. But they're going to use this technology to, I think, enchain us and to turn us into serfs, not to free us. That's what I'm worried about.
Well, you would think that, but it seems like at every point in history where we get to this point, something happens that prevents them from doing it, and then you have, a cataclysmic or tectonic shift in the entire world. And again, my view is that ultimately, the road is where we're headed, because I just think that, like you said, technology should be freeing us and it should be improving our lives, and yet they've turned technology on us. The surveillance state, the ability to monitor everyone and where they're going and what they're doing. And I ultimately think that, whereas fusion could be used for beneficent purposes, here we have these weapons of mass destruction that can just incinerate the entire earth. And I think that's where it's headed, in my opinion.
Well, let me get your thoughts on this then. I mentioned that part of the New World Order plan is to move us into a cashless society where they control everything. We know that that's what they've been up to, and that's what
Sure.
they want. Lawrence Summers has recently come out and said we should ban the $100 bill. And the excuse is always to prevent corruption, right? Because it's only the bad guys that deal in cash, not these criminal banks, right? Like HSBC and Wells Fargo,
Right.
et cetera, that launder billions of dollars for drug cartels. All right, so India's Prime Minister Modi is now saying, quote, we can gradually move from a less cash society to a cashless society. He says, this is the chance for you to enter the digital world, end quote. I don't think there's a government more corrupt. I don't think there's probably a nation on the planet more corrupt than India. Well, maybe with the exception of Washington, D.C., given PizzaGate. But what do you make of what's going on in India in this move towards a cashless society, which is clearly hurting the people?
I'm glad you brought this up, because there's a guy named Stuart Doherty, and he used to write all the time, kind of in the mid 2000s. I remember I used to read his stuff. It was posted on 321 Gold and some of the other precious metal aggregator sites, and then he kind of disappeared. And he told me his story, and I can't remember, and I don't know why he reached out through me, but he's been putting together some great work and having me guest posted, and I just literally this morning posted his latest. He titled it "Indian Demonetization Denotes Severe Stress in the Global Gold Market," and that's kind of the theme of the article, and it talks about what they're doing, by eliminating the larger cash bills and trying to shift into a digital currency system. And it really, this is what I thought of when I first heard about this. He tied it to the West, or the deep states, attempt to curtail Indian gold demand, because they're starting to run out of physical gold to keep supplying into China and Russia and the other big Eastern Hemisphere buyers. And obviously, India, I agree with you, it's incredibly corrupt there, but I think it just reflects the complete corruption of the West, because India is essentially the lapdog for the United States.
Yeah, as is Japan.
Right, exactly, exactly. And if you recall, and a lot of writers don't even bring this up, but I think it's an important backstory. I mean, Modi was elected over there on a populist platform, and everyone thought that he was going to, reduce or eliminate the 10% tariff on gold, and he was going to make it easier for Indians to buy gold. And ever since he's gotten in there, he's tried to make it harder. And every attempt he's made has failed miserably. And so, the only way to try and control how much gold the Indians are buying, right, is to control how they spend their cash. And the only way to control how they spend their cash is to move into a digital currency system. And so, and Stuart didn't write about this, but this was my view. I think India was used as sort of a testing ground to be the first one to. It was the easiest place to kind of implement it, and the people there are anti-violent. They're not going to rise up. They're not armed the way Americans are. Yeah. And so I think the number one priority with what happened there was to try and curtail the demand for Indian gold. And I don't think it's any coincidence, if you remember, that whole scheme was rolled out right around the time of the U.S. election, and if you remember, when it became apparent that Trump was going to win, gold ran up, and I think it touched 1390. It had run up about $80 during the counting of the votes as the results were rolling in, and as soon as it started selling off a little bit before he was declared the winner, but when he had obviously won, and that's when they really started taking gold down hard. And I think it was all timed and coordinated to make it easier for them to use paper to push down the price of gold, because that's where this gold takedown is mostly occurring, is in the paper markets. If you go back over the last 3 months and look at overnight charts, you'll see that in general, and this is not true every night, but I would bet at least 70% of the time, the price of gold rises when the Asian markets are open, and then it starts selling off as soon as London takes over and then New York takes over.
Right. Right. There's a real arbitrage right now, too. The arbitrage is growing between the SGE and the COMEX in the price of the gold and silver in this country. In the West, there's a real divergence in price, and we're seeing it particularly, I think, in silver. I'm not sure what it is right now, but I mean, the other day it was somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 20, 30 cents an ounce, 40 cents an ounce. And in gold, I think it was closer to between 12 and 20 bucks an ounce.
Actually, silver got as high as $1.50 an ounce, and I don't know where it is now. I get a newsletter every day from John Brimlow, and it's a subscription service, and he reports on India and China every night, and has data every night from those markets. And last night, Shanghai gold closed at a $22 premium to world gold, and that's probably the highest I've ever seen it.
Yeah, and this is what many have been predicting would happen. Eventually, the Western market would break, the paper market would break, as the people who really want physical can only get it from the SGE. So at some point, the divergence should become so great that it shines the light of truth on the COMEX and the Western market, which is only paper fraud. I mean, I think we're already seeing that because of this arbitrage.
Oh, I agree. I think a lot of people understand. I think they get what's going on. I mean, part of the problem in the paper market is the way the hedge funds operate, because it's easier for them to just index the price of gold and to chase momentum up and down, and it's all they've got it programmed in their algos anyway. So when the price of gold starts rising, they chase it higher. When the price of gold falls, and the cartel knows this, so the cartel needs to get the price of gold down. They start bombing the COMEX, and all of a sudden the hedge funds catch on to that, and then they start unloading their longs and getting short. And the latest Commitment of Traders report actually reflects that. If you look at the way that the positioning changed between the commercials and the managed money, which is the hedge funds, you'll see that the commercials added to their longs and reduced their shorts by quite a bit, and they've reduced it. They've done that quite a bit over the last 3 weeks, where they've reduced their net short exposure significantly, and the hedge funds have reduced their net long exposure significantly by unloading their longs and increasing their shorts. And so it's this electronic paper trading that is as much of the problem as anything. But you're right. I mean, I think these premiums we're seeing in Shanghai, and actually the Indian market is still at a pretty hefty premium. I mean, despite Modi's attempt to shut down gold demand, there's a lot of gold flowing into India right now, and you see that reflected in the premiums. And it's not just legal importing; it's also a ton of smuggling. So. Again, I think the laws of human nature and the laws of markets ultimately win out over attempts to control it. And we're starting to see elevated attempts to control it. And we're seeing elevated evidence that the natural laws of nature are fighting this attempt to control. And that's where I think that the danger lies for us.
Yeah, I agree. And let me posit this as we consider how few people in this country have physical silver or gold, right? I mean, what would you say off the top of your head is the percentage of the American public who owns precious metals in physical form on hand? What would you say, Dave?
Well, I think a lot of households have it in the form of, grandma's silver. their wedding set, or the gold in their wedding rings or whatever. But in terms of actively buying it, well less than 1%.
So those that would have it from Grandma's silver tea set or serving set from the late 1800s, we're talking about minimal amounts of metal, right?
Minimal amounts of, and the Cash for Gold program has removed a lot of that gold and silver from households.
Okay, well, let me posit this. As the war on cash intensifies, and this comes from Simon Black over at Sovereign Man, he writes, Citibank to stop accepting cash at some branches in Australia. And he says this is how it works. The government, media, banks, and even academia have formed a single unified chorus to push this idea out to consumers that cashless is good for everyone. So here's why this is so insidious, and we need to talk about it. We need to warn people, Dave. If they can do it in Australia, like they've already done it in India, if this thing starts to spill all across the Western world quickly, we may much sooner than we thought find ourselves in this nation having limited access to cash. And as they drain cash from the system, what is left to prevent them from turning us all into serfs? The thesis being this. What if at some point in the near future, or the not so near future, but at some point in the future, the elites will be those who have physical precious metals, the serfs will be everybody else? Because once they've banned cash, what are people going to have as tangible wealth, Dave? What will you have as your sign of tangible wealth? I don't think you're going to have anything. I think you're going to be a serf.
You're going to have a lot of debt obligations because most people out there are loaded up with mortgage debt, auto debt, credit card debt, etc.
And by the way, I'm not suggesting that cash is wealth. I'm just saying that it is seen as wealth. It is accepted as wealth. It's accepted still to this day as an exchange of wealth from person to person. But once the cash is gone, what's to prevent them from crashing the system of ones and zeros and bringing us all to our knees? And I swear to you, man, those 99 point whatever percent of people in this country that don't have physical precious metals will have no tangible wealth.
It's going to be, yeah. I'm kind of hoping that I don't live long enough to see that. Unfortunately, it's playing out, a lot more quickly than I think we would like it to. I don't know. I've ever since this idea of digital currency and eliminating cash sort of was brought out to the public, I've been sitting here trying to ponder how this is going to play out. And at this point, I honestly, I don't know. I mean, and again, India may be seen as a possible petri dish where they're testing out, trying to roll this out en masse.
Yeah. Well, I think Simon Black nails it. The idea is this, a unified chorus to push this idea out to consumers that cashless is good for everyone. It's just like PizzaGate. It's just endless lies. It's just a system built to protect those that would hurt us. It's a system. There's no justice. I saw a brilliant tweet last night from Kim.com, and as I turn this over to you to kind of sum things up, I'm going to find that tweet and I'll read it to you.
Again, I think, and again, I'm the consummate cynic, pessimist, negative Nelly, but I do think that human nature is going to eventually overrun this attempt to control our lives by the elitists. And I think, even though, again, I didn't vote, Trump's not going to be any different than Hillary would have been, and neither of those two would have been any different than Obama, who was no different from Bush, etc. So I really don't think that it matters at this point who the players are on DC. It's the players behind the players that count. But I do think that the movement that started, that put Trump in office, against overwhelming odds, I kind of think going into this, I don't think Trump ever intended to become president. I think he was running as a marketing thing because he's the consummate marketer. But I think that this, and the drain the swamp slogan, even though he's not going to drain the swamp, I think that gathered a lot of support around him. And so I do think that, contrary to what a lot of people in the alternative media like to posit out there, I do think that more and more people in the masses are starting to get it and understand. And I'm starting to think that part of the reason why we haven't seen a stronger push recently to try and go cashless, because there was a real strong push last year, if you remember, and it's kind of faded. I think they kind of understand that people may be catching on here, so they got to go back and regroup and try and figure out a more subtle way to make it happen. And again, I think that especially this election brought it out. I think more and more people are starting to distrust everything about the establishment, the mainstream media, etc. And that hopefully that may be our savior. But before we finish this up, I did want to say, congratulations, because we're both fellow members of the list.
That's right. That's right. I'm a proud member of the fake news called out by Washington Post and their lackeys that wrote that report. Yeah, if you look at that list of 200 of us on there, Dave, that's a who's who of media you can trust. That's a who's who of truth media. So they've actually done us a wonderful marketing favor by putting us on that list.
That's exactly right. And I actually had posted, because I was out of town last week, I posted a blog post yesterday about that I was honored to be on the list, and how ironic it is that that list is actually the alternative media that's trying to put the truth out there.
Yeah, and I think people know it. All people have to do, the sheeple people that might read that report from the Washington Post, is go and visit any 5 of those sites. I don't care which 5, any 5 of those sites. And if you have critical thinking skills at all, you're going to continue to visit those sites, because you're going to get information that is not the concocted State Department, establishment, propaganda stuff, crap that you get from CNN. So anybody that visits any 5 of those sites is going to wake up. So I think it was a great service. Hey, while I was looking for that Kim.com tweet, I came across this in my own Twitter feed, which I neglected to mention. We talked about cashless society turning us all into serfs. How about this? How about the hyperinflationary endgame? We need to keep in mind that hyperinflation would also turn us all into serfs. Apparently, the Venezuelan currency crashed 15% in one day. If you want to see what it's like to be turned into a serf due to hyperinflation, just visit Venezuela.
Well, I mean, the only reason that the currencies in all these other countries are collapsing is that, they're still using the dollar as a flight to safety. But I mean, if you compare the finances of the United States government with any other government in the world, any other country in the world, and especially if you combine the public side and the private sector finances, and then fiscally, the U.S. and financially is in the worst shape of any country out there. And part of what's going on in Venezuela is obviously it's a CIA deep state operation to try and bring that country down. And I mean, we've been trying to bring that country down for a long time, and Hugo Chavez was in the way. And now that he's out of the way, all of a sudden you're starting to see bad things happen in Venezuela, including the sale leaseback of their gold that Hugo Chavez had taken great pains to repatriate.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, man, at the heart of all of this are these intelligence agencies and these central banks, which I think created the intelligence agencies. The banksters created these intelligence agencies to serve their own ends. And I did find this tweet from Kim.com that I retweeted last night. It was in response to Edward Snowden, who said, "Imagine a world in which ordinary citizens and political elites experience the same justice. It doesn't have to be like this." To which Kim.com responded, "They are not playing by the rules. Our laws don't apply to them. They own the justice system. They own law enforcement. Justice is their weapon." And I think he's spot on. Hillary Clinton can commit all measure of crime and go unprosecuted. She can commit perjury. She can commit treason. She can be involved in what appears to be pedophile circles and potentially child trafficking in Haiti with her friend Laura Silsby. And there is no justice. But they'll use justice. They'll use their justice system against us, against we the people. You blow the whistle on pedophilia, you get your kids taken away. Justice is their weapon, says Kim.com. I think he's right.
Well, what blew me away about the whole election process was the benefit of doubt the Hillary Clinton supporters in the masses were willing to give her. I mean, to me, she was probably the most corrupt politician in the history of the world. It's just incredible. What you were just talking about the deep state and the New World Order and how it's controlled by the central banks, etc. The Stuart Doherty, part of his article today, and I didn't know this. I mean, I knew part of this, but the guy who was the governor of the Central Bank of India, his last name is, I guess you'd say it, Rajan or something, Raghuram Rajan. He declined a second 3-year term, and he was also a former chief economist at the IMF. And he's a member of the Group of 30 along with Larry Summers, and he is now the vice chairman of the Bank of International Settlements. And I thought that was interesting because I didn't know that he had been moved over to vice chairman of the Bank of International Settlements. So it kind of helps you connect the dots here in terms of what's going on in India. That wasn't even necessarily coming straight from the United States. It was a directive from the BIS.
Yeah, which I believe was set up by the Rothschilds. I mean, I know. So often we say it's the Rothschilds. I know this conspiracy is much larger than just the Rothschilds, but I think they own just about every central bank on the planet, and the Bank of International Settlements is the central bank.
Right, and it's not conspiracy theory, it's conspiracy truth.
Yeah.
Because the evidence is there for anyone who wants to look at it.
You know, I got to say, man, as we wrap up here, thank God for the WikiLeaks Podesta emails. You know? Some people are calling PizzaGate a honeypot. It's a trap. It's going to, to discredit the alt media. I don't buy it because there have been so many documentable things that people have made videos about and written articles about. I don't think there's been one of these WikiLeaks emails yet that have been disproven or proven to be fraudulent. So I think they're extremely valuable, and I think the fact that many of us in the world are waking up to the fact that there is a global child trafficking and pedophilia ring, which we've known about for decades, Dave, with Jimmy Savile, the Franklin cover-up. We've known about this for decades, but just here and there, little reports of it throughout time. Now we see that it's a much larger, more organized, more entrenched ring. It's scary, but I'm glad we know about it.
It just shows how sick these people are is really what it is. And, I'm with you. During the whole election season, I woke up every day saying, thank God for these Podesta emails. I mean, it really shows you, it gave you a firsthand look at just how dirty it really is inside these political rings.
It's absolutely horrifying. So I'm just very grateful to have the WikiLeaks Podesta emails, and I'm very grateful to all the researchers out there that are breaking this stuff wide open and digging through those emails and finding this evidence of abominations, of horrors, of illegalities and criminality at the very highest levels of our government. Dave, I always enjoy speaking with you because we can just speak off the cuff, and we generally come up with some pretty interesting topics to discuss. We had no agenda today. I had no agenda other than to start with that New World Order soundbite from Bush Sr. So thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me. And, you always, whenever I do podcasts with you, it's like I got to stay alert the whole time, and I always got to try and think ahead. It's like it gets my intellectual gears turning, and that doesn't happen very much anymore. I find it as equally enjoyable as you do.
Okay, well, that's nice of you to say. Thanks, man. And shout out your website name. How can people find you, and how can we support you?
Investment Research Dynamics. And you can just go to the website and read a couple of the articles, and that helps support me. And I also have 2 subscription services, the Mining Stock Journal and the Short Sellers Journal. There's ways to make money on the short side of this market, and at some point this thing's going to turn over and really head south quickly. And if you're set up short, you can take advantage of it, take your profits and turn it into physical.
Guys, check out Dave's website, investmentresearchdynamics.com. Dave, thanks so much, man.
Thanks again for having me. I love doing this show.
Thanks, man. My pleasure. And we'll get you back on soon. And guys, thank you so much for your support. Visit us at sgtreport.com for real news 24/7. And check out thephaser.com and thelibertymill.com too. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a great week.
When you look upon these pedophile trafficking network and so on, there are, even though it sounds incredibly sick and so on, there are actually parents delivering children to these rings. I mean, their own children as well.